Milka.
You make some great
What are we going to Milka today?
Red flag, red flag, red flag.
Wow.
We'll put that one up for today. It's outlived its usefulness.
And Jason
Wow.
is
And
fired.
thank you, Jason, for being a part
Guys
of this.
thought we were-
Yeah, you can leave now.
I'm from Columbus County, guys.
Yeah, he's
I just threw it out there.
he's thinking
What
about
are
cows.
you gonna milk
We
today?
actually,
Well, welcome to Bonus Features, our podcast where we talk about the details we didn't quite have time to get into on Sunday. I'm our host. My name is Caroline. I'm joined here today by our resident nerd. You've decided
good
you want to
job.
go back
Good job.
to nerd.
Well done. Yeah, I just feel like it lessens the expectation.
All right.
That resident expert makes me feel like I have to really know what I'm talking
should wear a
about.
bow
If I'm a
tie,
nerd,
I
it's
think.
just kind of more of like
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. Well,
Nerd culture is cool, though, right?
oh, it is. That's true. Well, Pastor Jason, resident nerd. We'll get you a
Every
plaque.
nerd. Yep, it's great
And
to be here.
Pastor Kevin.
What's up?
Your first time on this
Hey,
season.
No, it's good to see you guys. They let me back in the room.
You didn't get killed off.
I'm the resident cancelable guy, right? Is that my title?
Yeah, it's a longer title, but a fitting
Yeah,
one.
I'll take it.
honestly.
I'll take it.
It's all
Yeah,
right.
I'll take it. Good to see you guys.
Well, thanks.
Glad you could make
To
it.
hang out.
Hey, listen. This is our last Old Testament book. What are we gonna like? I feel like we're gonna have to change it up for New Testament. I feel like we're gonna have to
yeah.
completely shift everything that we
That
do
would be awesome.
because we have Old Testament vibes, right now. Don't you think?
Well, and the fun thing with the Old Testament is so many people don't know all of the stories, so you could leave cliffhangers and do little things. Now in the New Testament,
Oh, people are
more
gonna
people
Karen
are
us.
familiar.
I have to get smarter people in here for that.
Yeah, people are gonna Karen us and be like, "That's actually not what Jesus said, and that's not how
Right.
he said it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, preaching the obscure books are not bad because people are like, I didn't even know that was there. you
Yeah.
know? Get
Yeah.
into Matthew and it's like, well,
Everybody knows that. And
right.
You're like, "Oh,
right.
yeah, The
sick."
Chosen explains everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
spoiler.
I watched The
But-
Chosen, and I know how this goes.
In the New Testament, we can really say whatever we want in here because it's all under grace. Not
True.
all
liberty.
right, come on.
Christian liberty is
Thank
the flag.
the Lord.
Just saying.
Amen.
Trying to-
Speaking of being canceled. Yeah. Come back next season. But yeah, this is our last book, but not our last episode of the season. We have another one.
Oh,
Cliffhanger. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything
spoilers?
else.
No
No
spoilers?
spoilers.
All right, no
No
spoilers.
whammies, but all right, but Malachi. Pastor Kevin.
Malachi.
Malachi.
that Italian prophet.
Yeah, you pronounced it wrong. You kept saying Malachi. I was really embarrassed for you.
I was like, who is that?
I was like, that's
Where is
not
that in the
Malachi.
Bible?
Yeah. Who's he? We've been talking about Malachi for many a week now.
That's funny.
But
That's funny. Yeah, so yesterday was great. It was a good weekend, good service. And we dove in and we took kind of a overview, which is what we do. Just if people weren't there, I mean, essentially, you break this book into about three sections when you read it. The first section is what I call the assertion. It's God just saying like, hey, one final thing before I go on radio silence. And it's really only the first few verses where God's saying to the nation of Israel, one more time, I love you. I want to remind you of that. If everything I've done in the past doesn't prove that, let me just say it one more time. And what the assertion did, and we can talk through this as we go, but it sort of sets the tone for the book. Because the entire book is this series of, I think it's actually called, and you may know if I'm right on this, I think it's the dialectic style, which is where God would say something, then God would present the people's argument, then God would present the answer. So it's just kind of that, if you're a parent, you've probably done this before, right?
Well, and even that, so that even separated, like, was kind of how some of the books were separated, because I know that early in the first seasons of Binge the Bible, there was some question because we started with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, Pentateuch. But then we learned what the Tanakh was. So you got the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, which are the 3 sections of basically the Hebrew Bible. And some question kind of came up from some of the other nerds out there. Was like, well, for us, we have like major prophets and minor prophets. Some of the guys that we've designated as prophets aren't the same as what the Hebrew Bible says are the prophets. And Malachi, we see him as he's one of the last of the prophets in I get the words mixed up partly because I'm from Columbus County and big words are hard. But the Nevi'im, he's one of the last prophets mentioned. But then you've got other guys like Daniel, and it was because of his dialectic style, the reason he got put into the prophets and not into the writings like Daniel and other people that we would consider prophets.
Yeah. It's interesting when you kind of break that down, and the style of it actually tees something up that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So we're going to tease it a little bit. We'll talk about something that's kind of cool, not a lot of people know, but I think is an interesting maybe about the book of Malachi. Mm-hmm. But it starts with God saying, I love you. Then it goes into section 2. I called them the objections, and it's essentially this series of just complaints, grievances that God has against the priests, the religious leaders, and the people living in Jerusalem. So it's kind of, he went back and forth a little bit. Some of them were blended, but he would do that same style, like, this is truth, but you say this, but here's the answer. Yeah. And so it went through that. All in all, there were 7 of those throughout the book, and we're going to touch on at least the majority of those today. And then the final thing was the reaction, and that's really the latter part of chapter 4, where there's a promise of a coming Messiah. There's a promise of, or it really ends kind of the whole thing by saying the curse that was in Genesis is still alive and active today, but hope is coming. Yeah. And then the Old Testament goes quiet. Yep. And so a couple interesting things. I was reading one commentary, studying for this. You know, I've always thought Malachi was the last prophet of the Old Testament, but really John the Baptist was the last prophet of the Old Testament because Malachi tells of him, and then Jesus actually referenced him multiple times too, but he is the final voice of the Lord before Jesus comes on the scene, which is kind of an interesting little dynamic there. But do y'all want to give away the little thing that we were talking about?
Yeah, let's cover that, because this is where I get to kind of nerd out a little bit, so... PK, thanks for being indulgent, but I kind of figured you had a little something in there.
I didn't say this yesterday. Yeah, I didn't think I had time.
I wanted to shout you out too, because like we even said, preaching a message on a book of the Bible in one Sunday is hard, and to do it and leave everyone like kind of learning, but also inspired and hearing from the Holy Spirit themselves, awesome. That's awesome. It was a great word. I enjoyed it. So what we wanted to discuss was just authorship. And this even kind of, a little bit of this goes back into 2 episodes ago, we discussed Haggai. Telling you in my head, he's still, hey, guy. I still want to say, hey, guy. I can't even say it to myself now. But one of the questions came up, and just talking with some of my other nerd friends, you know, we do get in rooms with calculators, even though I'm horrible with numbers. But
who are these nerd friends?
Yeah, we're the ones that get together and we talk about Lord of the Rings and, you
know. Okay.
Geek gatherings.
Wow, you guys.
Yeah.
Listen, Lord of the Rings is good, but...
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Oh,
we were like, we were just owing because, like, that's cool.
Yeah, right. That kind of cool.
I'm that gullible. But, you know, we were looking, and one of them, you know, some of the questions I got was like, well, you didn't really get into, like, authorship of Haggai and talk about, because there is, like, a pretty popular belief that Haggai didn't write it, because it does sound a little bit like multiple people wrote it or 2 people wrote it, and there was some speculation that Ezra maybe wrote some, or maybe even completed it. And Ezra is kind of a big deal. He's one of the ones that even kind of connects some of these latter prophets all together. And so one of the groups that Haggai was a part of, and we mentioned it earlier, PK, is called the Great Assembly. These are the guys that they started collecting a lot of these prophets and scrolls, and they were the ones that actually kickstarted the process of gathering the Tanakh. Because at the time, they really only focused on the Torah. And so bringing all this stuff together in my head, it doesn't take away from any of the authorship of the other books, right, because they're a team. I mean, if you're just keeping it on the same nerd scale, like if you're familiar with the Eagle and Child Pub in the UK, that's where the Eagle and Child Pub, like that's where C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, that's where they had their famous club and they would meet. And so they actually helped each other with stories, and they talked literature and theology and all this stuff. Kind of the same thing I see with the Great Assembly. Like, they're working on these things together. So if some of these things sound like multiple voices, to me, it doesn't detract from who actually wrote it and whose name it was kind of put on it, because this was my deal. Yeah. Some people, even with Haggai, people actually believe that they were his students that wrote it. But it just kind of goes into Malachi, because PK, we talked about it. One of the overarching beliefs with him is that Malachi is not a person or one person.
Yeah. Well, Malachi, one of the things I read says that Malachi is in that time was not a name. It was a title, but it was a title of messenger. Like, the name means messenger. And so when people back then would have heard that name, it would have communicated more messenger than person. So kind of this is something as a collective, as whatever we're writing. And yeah, there's multiple people that could have spoken into the authorship. The way the book is written, honestly, I kind of could see that because it's written almost in these, again, that dialectic style where it's sort of some hits and then backing off, if that makes sense. I could see it being written that way. One of the things I read about the Great Assembly, Pastor Jason, was also that they would get a good overall glimpse of the story of God and the story of man, and they would find commonalities in between them, like where there were trends one way or trends the other, which honestly speaks to the way this is written as well. Like it's a trend of God to do this, it's a trend of man to do this, and they would tell that story that way. So it's just interesting. Now I will say, whatever you talked about, the groundhog and the rabbit hole or whatever that was, I have no idea what you're talking about. I feel somehow smarter from just sitting beside you. I don't know
I feel
that.
dumber.
I don't know that location. I know they're like the Avengers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or
them I know.
That location I don't know. I know the Chattahoochie. It gets hotter than
Way
it
down
is.
yonder?
You know what I'm saying?
Kind of down on the Georgia asphalt.
Right. All right. Anyway, sorry.
Well, and just there were a couple of like historians that were a little closer to when this actually happened, not in the same day, but not as far as us, but Jerome and Josephus. They actually they're famous historians.
I know, but that's
a great name.
Yeah, that's just a great name.
Josephus needs to come back.
Yeah.
Josephus.
That's just a good name.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
think that's
solid
good.
name. Uncle Josephus.
How about Bocephus?
Ooh.
Josephus is even.
Okay, you're from Georgia.
Let's
you know any
go.
Bocephus?
I do.
Bosephi.
I do. Wait a minute, what?
He said, "Do you know any Bosephuses?" And I said, "Bosephi."
Bosephi. Is that the plural of
Yeah, of course.
Josephuses?
Obviously, clearly.
Yeah, this is when we
Bocephus
need
is
sound
more fun to
effects.
say.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
But these are two historians that they both actually believe that it was more Ezra that would have led the charge. But again, it makes sense because he was connected to Haggai. Both of these guys were speaking to a nation. In fact, they were speaking to a nation still rebuilding. And so it just kind of made sense that they would have been doing exactly what you were saying, like taking all this down, collecting it so they could get it to the masses. Because, again, there was no social media. They had to circulate the word. It had to be a unified voice. So it's always kind of made sense to me that would be it. And there are some people that do believe that actually it was Zerubbabel that penned some of this because he would have been part of the Great Assembly as well. But just super fun
Another
discussion.
good name.
Yeah, Zerubbabel.
Let's bring that back. Awesome. Caroline, where are we going?
All right. Well, so you you mentioned a lot of the things in the message yesterday. So for those of you that are watching or listening, this podcast is really intended to like go in because this is a 30,000 foot view of the books of the Bible. And so the heart of our pastor was really like, hey, let's give people an overview and then we'll get into some of the details through this podcast and all of that. We have resources. We're a church in North Carolina, in coastal North Carolina, and we have been doing on this journey for a couple years now. I think. And so there were some things that you said yesterday that you were like, hey, we'll touch on that a little bit later. And so maybe let's get into some of those, some of the teasers from yesterday.
Yeah, so the main thing where I feel like I left a lot on the cutting room floor, the Malachi name, I just didn't feel like that fit in the message. But then that middle section of the objections that God had, kind of another word would be complaints. You can go vacillate between those two words, but let's say complaints for now. That's what I feel like I left mainly on the cutting room floor. I talked about one of them, which was it's a passage we're familiar with. You can go back and watch the message to really get into this, but it's in chapter 3 where essentially the people are withholding their tithe from God, and it's a passage that we know. It comes out of like verse 6 where God says, I don't change, you've changed, and then he says, return to me and I'll return to you, and that you've been robbing God, and the way to come back to God is by bringing your tithe. Tithe is 10% of our income, and because the people were withholding their tithe, which is what resources, all the way back to Leviticus, it's what resources the temple work and the Levites or the priests. Because people were withholding their tithes, the priests were actually having to go abandon their work in the temple and generate resources on their own. So God's just saying, bring the tithe back. And then we know, and I love this, that it essentially says that's what positions us for blessing. Yeah. I think the reason God ties that to returning to me is because we all know our financial resources are most oftentimes the things that are closest to our heart, we hold them the closest. And I think he says this is the tip of the spear, because if you go there, if you trust me there, you're going to trust me with it. Everything else is going to take care of itself. And so I think there's a reason why he kind of attaches those things. So we won't cover that one anymore, but we'll cover some of the others. So just looking through pages of the Bible, looking through what God says, his complaints against the people. The first one was found in chapter 1, verse 6. We'll just read some of these. I've got a different, I'm not reading out of the NIV today, so forgive me for that.
What translation you got there, PK?
I have got I think this is the English Standard Version.
Ooh, yeah.
I've got it because I like the leather on the Bible.
The leather is sick.
It's like,
the leather
that's
is
the
really
only
cool.
reason.
There's a lot of reasons that people read different translations, and that's my favorite one so far.
This is my favorite Bible, and the reason is because I bought it, and I had a Bible for years. I still have it at home, but it's really worn out, and I preached from it for years. I think I bought it when Melissa and I first got married, so it had like 20 years on it, and I could have it rebound, but whatever. I just didn't do that, and it's got everything. I've written all in it, read it for years. I needed a new one, so I go and find one that the leather was almost just like the former one, and I get it home, open it up, and start reading. I'm like, man, this just feels more light. Sounds different. It's just different.
God's just doing
That's
something.
the Lord. He's just made it fresh, right? And then I look at it and I'm like, this isn't even the NIV. What am I doing? But I've already bought in at that point, so I've written in it, and I love the leather. Anyway, so
You said it's the ESV?
ESV.
Yeah.
I like the ESV.
So it's leather bound and etched, and it's the ESV.
I have many leather bound
Pretty
books.
pretty high level.
I know, right? So anyway, that's my that's the deep end of the pool of Kevin's life, right?
I appreciate
But
that.
it's in verse 6. So here's what God says in verse 6. As a son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? If I'm a master, where is my fear, says the Lord of hosts. And then he speaks to the priest directly. O priest, you despise my name, but you would say to us, how have we despised your name? And then he goes in by saying, by offering polluted food upon my altar. Essentially, their sacrifices were weak sacrifices. I don't know how else to say that. They were dishonoring God because they didn't honor him. They didn't fear him. They were bringing things to him that were substandard. So the first complaint is there's no honor.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think in our culture, that's probably still pretty relevant.
And I do like how you said it yesterday. You mentioned earlier that you described that as half-hearted.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, it feels that way. Like they definitely had. I mean, fast forward, like they had a form of godliness, but they denied the power thereof. You know, like it was definitely that.
Yeah.
That was their vibe. And again, this is the priests. So the first one that he's talking to, priests. So that's the first one. The next complaint that I would go to would probably be a couple verses down in verse 8. He keeps going, and he says in verse 8, sort of in the same complaint, he says, when you offer blind animals in sacrifice, is that not evil? When you offer those that are lame or sick, is that not evil? Present that to, mine says governor, but present that to like an elected official, somebody that you can actually like tangibly have in front of you, a president or a governor. Would they accept that as showing favor? And essentially what he's saying is, if they wouldn't, why would I? And what was going on in the culture was they were bringing livestock that they would bring the best of. They would sacrifice those livestock, but they were bringing animals that were blind. They were bringing things that, the way I like to think about it, didn't cost them anything.
Yeah.
It was kind of we're doing this, like we're supposed to do this, but it doesn't cost me anything. It's easy.
Which feels very familiar
Feels
to.
very familiar. And listen, here's the challenge is, it is easy to do that.
Yeah.
Like it is. I mean, you think practically. So for those who are listening who are not a part of our church, we're a church with 4 campuses, 4 locations across our city, and all of those locations have multiple services. Some of our locations have 3. We're looking at even adding more to that in the future. And there are just some times where it's easier to go to church.
Yeah.
It's just easy, right? But you choose to like sometimes sacrifice at a larger level to maybe go early or go late. And so even just that little bit, for some people, practically paying their tithes is, I hate to say easy, but maybe they've done it their entire lives. Like if you grew up like my wife grew up.
Yeah.
It's been her entire life, our entire marriage. So there comes a point where like it's not easy, but it's automatic. And if we're not careful, we can we can sort of skimp on what it means to actually sacrifice for the Lord, like to bring our best, because we just get in a rhythm.
Yeah, almost like it's got to hurt a little.
Yeah, and again, not all the time. I mean, obviously God didn't want to do it, but I think what he wants is he wants to know that he has our best.
Yeah.
He has our heart. And obviously for those people, he did not have that. The next one is really in the next verse, verse 10. This one he kind of points out greed. And I won't go through and read all that, but essentially what they were doing was they were keeping the temple operating, but they were doing some things to make money off of it. Like they were benefiting from what was going on in the temple. And so he calls that out and says that's not going to work. The fifth one is in chapter 2, verse 17. We'll just touch on this real quick. I almost read this verse yesterday because I felt like it was just the language of it almost spoke to if I were the Lord, the way that I would have felt. And he says, you've wearied the Lord with your words. Also as a parent.
I'll say, have you? I feel like you've probably felt that before.
Right.
I know I have.
Right, a couple of times. But he says, have you wearied the Lord with your words? But you say, how have we done this? Again, this is that same style. By saying, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or by asking, where is the God of justice? So that first sentence, everyone does evil what is good in the sight of the Lord, or however, the way I read that. Essentially what they were doing was minimizing sin. They were going, okay, you're not doing right, but really, the Lord's okay with it. The Lord's okay. And their minimalistic view of sin led them to open their lives to sin further down the road, like divorce and marrying other religions, which God was totally against. Yeah. So he was just coming against the fact that they had a very passive view of what it meant to sin. Yeah. And they were dismissing people that way. So that's another one. He talks about one of them is the giving. We've covered that. And then I think it's chapter 3, verse 13. He gets into what I believe is the final one. And he says, your words have been hard against me, says the Lord. But you say, how have we spoken against you? You have said, it is vain to serve God. What is the profit of our keeping his charge or walking as in the morning of the call of the Lord of the hosts? And now we call the arrogant blessed. Evildoers not only prosper, but they put God to the test and they escape. Essentially what people were saying is, it's in the first sentence, it's vain to serve God. What's in it for me? Mm-hmm. That's what people are saying. And they're seeing, to what they're saying, they're seeing some other people who are not living for God. Some of these pagan cultures kind of seem to prosper. And they're looking at it and going, if they're doing well, then why should I keep following the Lord of hosts? So again, they've forgotten everything that the Lord has done in the past. And the Lord just calls it out and says, no, it's not vain. It's not just about what's in it for you, but it's about a relationship. So that, to me, those were the things I left on the cutting room floor just because I didn't feel like I could cover all of that. I tried to say it in a few sentences and give a little highlight reel, but it's hard to dive in the weeds of all of that. Honestly, every one of those things could probably be its own sermon.
Yeah.
But those would be really fun sermons to sit through, right?
Yeah. And it is kind of funny how we see the Old Testament wrapping with this direction, because honestly, it's almost like Old Testament is a little bit of a husband listening to a wife. It's the same thing over and over, like kind of fix it for a while, then it gets bad again, then you have to address it again, and same thing. It's the same thing. But it seems like Malachi gets more to the heart, because I just read, even in what you were just reading, before we jumped into chapter 3, it was saying that bringing the wrong offerings and sacrifices wasn't necessary. It was the sin, but it wasn't the reason they were being addressed. They were being addressed because of a much deeper symptom, that these were all symptoms of a much deeper issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. I think about it a little bit in terms of the book of Deuteronomy. So the Deuteronomy ends the Pentateuch, right? Mm-hmm. So everything's happened. God's been faithful. He's shown up. They're getting ready to cross over into the Promised Land. And they almost one more time tell the history to remind of, here's everything that God's done, right? They're telling that story one more time before they go over to the Promised Land. To me, this is similar. It's just from the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
God's been faithful. He's done all these things, but here's how we've not honored that.
Yeah.
Here's how you've not lived up to that. And it's saying that essentially it's a retelling of history. It's just retelling it from a lens of God's never left. He's always been faithful.
Yeah.
And we've not been faithful back. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good reminder that, I mean, Scripture is relevant then and now, because a lot of that is like, man, that's
Right.
that is
Right.
familiar sounding for our culture and our world right now.
There's a segment, and I didn't want to get into this. There's almost this little segment at the end of chapter 3 that it's right before you get into some prophecy about the future, which chapter 4, just so you guys know, if you read that, in chapter 4 feels like it weaves in and out of like the great and terrible day of the Lord, you know, where all this stuff could happen, like, and Jesus being prophesied about, and the next Elijah, which we know to be John the Baptist. Like, if you hear kind of all of this stuff woven in and out, it's because it is woven in and out. Like, it's one of those things that sometimes when you read the Bible, you'll read maybe a section or a chapter, and it might feel overwhelming. Like, was that talking about all the different things I thought it was talking about? The answer is sometimes yes. And you just have to slow up when you read it. Like chapter 4 of Malachi is one of those that in my one-year Bible when I'm reading, I'll read it, and I've read it enough to be able to, like, I've broken it apart. But I remember the first few times, like, I had to stop and just slow down there and go, hey, I need to understand what, sometimes in the same sentence, you'll have 3 different thoughts that are from the past, the not-too-distant future, and the end-times future, all in the same, like, little context. And it's not bad sometimes to slow up and actually study a chapter or study. It's the one thing for me, like I'm always trying to keep up with one-year Bible every day. The downside of that is I don't give myself permission to go, maybe I just need to kind of camp out in this because I do not understand what's going on right now. Yeah. And chapter 4 is that. But right before it, Pastor Jason, I'm interested if you have a take on this or how much you know of it. I'm going to confess I don't feel like I'm that well-versed in this part. Yeah. But it's chapter 3, verse 16. Essentially, if what I'm gathering is correct, that they are talking about a remnant of people in Jerusalem. That of all these things that have gone wrong, there's a remnant that have gotten it right. And he writes that there's a book of remembrance. And I can just read it in verse 16. It says, then those who feared the Lord spoke to one another. The Lord paid attention and heard them. And a book of remembrance was written before him of those who feared the Lord and esteemed his name. They shall be mine, says the Lord of hosts, in the day when I make up my treasured possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his son who serves him. Then once more you shall see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve God. So I know I have 2 thoughts on this, but I'm interested if you've read anything in your Lord of the Rings chat rooms. Have anything that popped up?
No, I was just scanning back through this little reference book I have open. I mean, honestly, this is my favorite part, not for anything typically nerd-like, just because I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I just love that there's an encouragement. And there's very few times in the Old Testament that God's judgment just goes out on everybody. I think this is it even kind of a little bit of foreshadowing of Jesus coming in and saying, I'll be with you always even to the end of the age. There'll be trouble in the world, but I'll be with you even to the end. And I just think it just reminds everybody that, you know, he always makes a way. Yeah. And even getting ready for Jesus so that he can make a way for us to have that right relationship. That's why it's my favorite. I don't think I remember anything particularly nerdy.
The only thing I know is, and these are all things that I've read. So, and I read this in the past. This is not a recent thing. But one is that it just does give hope for those people who are honestly, in a time like we're in now. Where, you know, it's tough. It's not great. Like even in the religious world, in the church world, like, y'all, there's some crazies out there. Like not everybody's sticking to this book, right? Not everybody's binging the Bible. Some people are binging opinions. And so it lets us know, like, hey, there's hope. Like, stay strong, stay steady. There's hope. And I feel like when I read this, the Lord's saying, I see you. Yeah. In those moments, I see you. There's also that one thing that I read that said of the city of Jerusalem, there was an actual book of people who were like living right, priests who were doing things right, that actually existed. And then the other is that it's a nod to the end times, where there's the Lamb's Book of Life, and those of us who've said yes to Jesus, our names are recorded, that it's a nod to that. So I don't really have a definitive answer on exactly everything that means. I think there's some practical, I think there's some hopeful, and I think there's potentially some prophetic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, the only extra thing that this little reference says, it does say that this is more than likely the response that Malachi or whoever was writing was looking for when they wrote the prophecy. They were looking for God to kind of make a way, because maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they didn't see the people changing much. And so they were looking for this, because this was saying that that this is specific to the nation of Israel, indicates an important aspect of God's character. Whether the people repented and turned back or stayed faithful throughout, God vowed anyway to keep the record of their faith. So either way, he was going to preserve a remnant moving forward, fulfill his promise to Abraham.
super cool, yeah.
So good stuff.
And then it ends.
And then it ends.
And then it ends.
And the end. What an end. Now, I will say, like, I was sitting there, like, watching your preaching, and I was like, all right, this ends in a pretty, like, negative
A wee bit
way.
dark. Yeah.
Like,
A wee
what's
bit
he going to
bit
do?
dark. It'd win an
How's he
Academy
going to save Sunday?
It would win an Academy Award. It's always the worst movies. The most depressing movies win Academy Award. Have y'all noticed
They
that?
always do. They
Like,
they blow.
It's every time.
Always.
Yeah, and everybody's like, you can't miss this. You got to watch it. And then I watch it, and I'm like,
have you seen Barbie? Because that deserved a
happy.
Come on.
flipping Oscar,
I know.
people.
Yeah. Was it not enough?
It was enough. Honestly.
So I've quoted Taylor Swift and Barbie in consecutive days. I need to go.
yeah, the value of your
out or
leather-bound
fight or something.
the value of your leather-bound ESV and just taking a hit with.
I know I might get excommunicated from brotherhood if I'm not careful. But no, it ends, and it ends. The Old Testament ends. God goes silent, and the word that it ends with is the word destruction or curse.
Love it.
And it's held over from Genesis chapter 3, chapter 4, and it will hold over until Jesus comes. Jesus comes back, and he makes a way where there's no way, and he erases the curse and replaces it with a blessing. And so the good news is we know what they didn't know. We've been able to read the back of the book, and they were not. So
And then the question is, are we any better off? Are we doing any better than they did?
yeah. No, it's real. I mean, when you look at culture and time, to me, the difference in us, like our time and this time, is that we have the way, the truth, and the life. Like the enemies come to steal, kill, and destroy. We have life, and we have it to the full in the midst of this, and we know where our hope and our promise is. They were still looking for it.
Yeah,
And I think for us, we know.
Yeah.
We know. In Jesus, we know.
it's true. Well, it's Malachi.
Yeah. I think we binged Malachi.
We done binged.
We
The
binged
Old
the Old
Testament.
Testament.
I am
What's
kind of
up,
bummed.
y'all?
I gotta say, I'm kind of bummed. Like I grabbed
We're
this from
prepared.
I grabbed this from Pastor Jeff right before I came in here. The Pocket Pronunciation Guide to Bible People, Places, and Things.
Just turn to a random page and just pick a
Just
just
pick-
pick
just
a
pick
just pick a
one?
name.
Oh, I turned right to the M's.
Oh,
And
this says Malachi, doesn't
okay.
it?
Actually, you know what? No, it doesn't.
I was like, wait,
It does have Milo.
Milo,
Milo, you know Milo. Everybody knows Milo.
Milo.
Milka.
You make some great
What are we gonna Milka today?
Ugh. Red flag, red flag, red flag.
Wow.
We'll put that one up for today. It's
Yeah.
outlived its usefulness.
And Jason
Wow.
is
And
fired.
thank you, Jason, for being a part
Guys
of
thought
Big
we were-
Bible
Yeah, you
Podcast.
can leave now.
I'm
Ah,
from Columbus County, guys.
yeah, he's
Are
I
you
just threw it
gonna-
out there.
he's thinking
What
about
are
cows.
you gonna milk
We
today?
actually, we did.
Sick.
I mean,
Please don't make it
So I
better.
have a segment. Can I pitch a segment?
Oh boy, we're pitching a
is
segment.
it like the doggy bag? Because Caroline loves the doggy bag.
What's the doggy bag?
That's our takeaways.
Yeah,
What are you gonna
okay.
take home?
Okay. Doggy bag. I like
See how
that.
that fits? Doesn't that
That
work?
does fit.
it does not fit.
No, mine is this. I think for every book of the Bible, we should name one 80s or 90s country song that
I feel like you've
sums
mentioned
up-
this before,
I
and we
think it
have
would be a
we have
brilliant
failed.
segment.
Sums it
and put
up.
this
Listen,
in, yep.
viewership and listenership would go through the roof.
agree.
I'm telling you,
Agree.
it would
We
go
could play
global.
a little
I was
segment
gonna
of
say,
the
and then
song.
we could even
we
close
have
the
rights for
show
that?
with.
That feels like somebody else's job
Sure.
to figure out, but I'm like,
I mean, I'm just saying.
let's just
course.
play it.
So- on the
any
internet, you can play
suggestions? Malachi, country song. I wish I'd actually thought of one before.
I was gonna say that feels. This doesn't fit at all. The only country song I can think of is courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. That's the only I can think of. And boy, does that not fit.
You'll put a boot where?
Yeah, my version says no.
Now, the only one I got coming to mind is like When Thunder Rolls. When thunder rolls and the lightning strikes.
Okay.
All right.
We'll raise a red Solo cup to Toby Keith. I want to talk about me. Because he goes through all the. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about.
Oh, that's good.
And he goes through all the grievances.
Okay.
Right? Come
There
on.
you go. Come on.
Second career right here.
All right, producers, hit that
Done.
song. Go. I don't know if that's gonna happen.
We can sing it.
Let's see.
You're a better singer than I am, but I know the words.
Well, and today's episode will be brought to us by
Red
the
Solo
late
Cups.
great Toby Keith. I don't even know all the words. That was one of the songs I played on repeat the day I heard he died.
Really?
Yep, one of my favorites.
It's the one where
And I'm horrible. I lead worship, and I never remember lyrics for anything.
Well, the verses are kind of like a rap, right? They're kind of. He did that a couple times where it's. How do the
probably
verses?
still on my
I know
list.
the chorus really well.
I'm trying to think of how it starts.
I just remember where he says, "Talk about your
Talk about your
Nana in Muncie, Indiana."
Muncie, Indiana. Yeah.
But it's that kind of like real.
Grandma down in Alabama.
Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one.
But it's all the things that he's upset about.
Yeah. Which
And then he says, "I want to talk about me."
And is that the name of the song?
it's I want to talk about me, I think. Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah,
Oh, are we gonna play it?
can I?
Sure. Again, I don't know about that. Write some stuff.
Such a good song.
Yeah. That's the best
I
part.
love it. You sound just like him, Caroline. You should do this for a living.
I know.
About your work. How
I've
your
worked
boss
really
is
hard
a
on that.
See, this is Christian.
Crazy ex-lover.
Oh, this is a Christian podcast, y'all. Come on. What are y'all doing?
This is
See, it's these
The
are
best
all
segment.
God knows
Y'all,
we're gonna.
these are all the
talk about
grievances.
clothes.
That was
I'm just telling you.
man, well done.
I just come in. I'm
Well
Consider
done.
me the closer. Closing the Old Testament.
There you go.
Bringing something new to the
Done.
table.
That was great.
We should just go back. That should be our next podcast. We just go back to all the old books of the Bible
Listen,
that we've already binged.
I'm
and
just
do it.
trying to add value. I'm
Binge
like
the
Ricky
Bible
Bobby. I wake up in the
.org.
morning and it's excellence.
We got a playlist going.
Is that your second Ricky Bobby quote of the
No,
weekend?
I had to make up for the Taylor Swift and the Barbie and yeah.
You don't have to make up for it. We
So,
appreciate
a
it.
couple of Ricky Bobbies, Toby Keith.
Yeah.
I feel like my work here's done. I'm taking the rest of the week off.
yeah.
You're
honestly.
definitely in your spot, PK. That was awesome.
Yeah, you did great. Well, it is time to take a break to hear from our unofficial sponsors. This is the most stressful part of this day. And if you guys are
little
new to the
nervous.
podcast and you don't know,
I will say, PK, there are no snakes in that bag.
what?
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm not picking that one.
Who is it responsible?
Our producers have put a bag of random stuff together that we have to pitch. Oh, I got Old Maid. So, hold on, can I open?
Can we get ours out so we can start?
No, you can't. You can't prepare. You have to do it on.
It's one of the rules.
So, Old Maid is a little card with a grandma because your grandma, she knows what's up, and you should listen to her and take her advice. And you know what I mean? Like when you stray from Mama's advice, that's when things get dicey in your life.
Yeah, I feel like that was in your message, right?
That's when you stray from Mama's advice.
And my grandma has never been known as Mama. I don't know why that's what I reached for, but that's
What are y'all's grandmothers known as?
Grandma.
Grandma?
Yeah, and grandmother. She said, "Don't
Grandmother.
call me
Like-
She said, "Don't call me
Nice,
Grandma," and I was
nice.
like, "Okay, whatever, Felicia."
Yeah, mine was
Her literal
Grammy.
Grammy.
Okay. So I had Mamaw,
Yeah,
and then I had Mawmaw.
Mama.
And then we had a next door neighbor that we grew up next to. They were kind of the age of grandparents, and they loved us, and we called her Meemaw.
I did have a Meemaw.
What's up? Yeah. And,
I just thought that was her name.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was her title.
oh, 100%. When I found out that grandparents had real names,
Yeah. You're
it's
like,
like seeing a teacher outside of school.
ew,
What are you doing?
Yeah. Like, what are you,
Supposed to
yeah.
exist there.
I had a Mamu. I guess that counts. It was like,
Mamu.
that's like, so I've never thought about that. That's a weird thing. But same kind of thing, because that's like family, friends, and that was,
A character in a cartoon.
yeah, pretty
So
much.
I think now grandparent names have gotten a little spacey. Like
People-
I heard Sugar.
Yeah. Happy is one. Yeah.
Pastor Dino Rizzo, who spoke at our church
Oh, yeah.
a while back, he said the other day at a conference, his grandfather's name was Chief, which honestly was kind of cool.
It is
Yeah, I
kind of
would-
That's
dope.
kind
I
of
would-
cool.
I would
Yeah.
take that.
People are just
I'd
like
take
picking
that.
word, and then like
Good words.
somebody, I was talking to somebody, and she was like, "Yeah, my mom's decided that she wants to be called Nona," and I was like, "Oh, that's cute." She's like, "Yeah, but we're not Italian. Like, they're like a Hispanic family," and she's like, "I'm Nona," and I'm like, "That's what you can't what." That's
Yeah.
not a thing.
Anyway.
You just pick whatever you want.
Already. I'm kind of scared
I'm-
about what
I'm Stephanie.
Like-
That's not gonna be mine. Just
Stephanie.
pick it. That's what I did not want to choose.
Yep. I kind of, as soon as I put my hand, I felt like I was cheating if I removed my hand and picked something else, though. I have no idea.
Go ahead.
I have no idea what this is. It's not a salt shaker. I would pitch something right now, but I have no idea what this is.
Do you want some help?
There.
I think I could be wrong, but I think that you use that on citrus, like a juicer situation.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Oh, I thought it was a light. I think the light's shining through it. So I was like,
Oh,
that's
the weirdest
okay. So
flashlight
now
ever.
it takes on a whole different.
I mean,
meaning.
naturally, I just see a weapon.
looks like a weapon. Use it as a weapon. Yeah.
It is an instrument of God's judgment
Oh, there it is.
that He's placed in my hand, and it's reminded me from the book of Malachi, because the day of the Lord is coming. And what's His instrument of judgment going to be? Probably not this.
But maybe. I mean, you never really know, honestly.
I failed today. Sorry.
So you could have had a lot more fun.
I was.
I would actually like for you to
I
start
was afraid. I'm actually kind of glad that I got this and you didn't.
See.
I'd like for you to start over and
No,
do
what is
that and combine the name that you were looking at of who you're going to milk or whatever. Like, because juicer would work for that.
Now, if we're playing props.
It's even more fun. What do you- Okay, so I have a box of California raisins.
Ugh.
Are you not raisin fan?
Oh, I hate them.
Raisin fan?
It's nature's candy, man.
I hate that you said that. Sick.
So are we doing like a legit, so this is made by Southern Grove,
This is honestly whatever you need it to be.
90 calories. All right, so am I going to this camera? Or does it
Do whatever you want to do.
So this is California raisins. So just when you think that your diet and possibly your life isn't bad enough, Southern Grove brings you nature's candy. Only 90 calories. You too can have a snack that will not only leave you unsatisfied, not only leave you wanting to eat something more, but also wanting to make you completely start your day over. California raisins, brought to you by Southern Grove.
And also, if you put those in cookies here at Lifepoint, you will probably
you'll
lose.
get fired.
Yeah. This is if you work at Lifepoint Church, Southern Grove has presented you a way to get yourself fired or demoted.
We have a
Baking cookies
page.
with this.
A page on our website for other life-giving churches in our
We have a
area.
page. Yes,
That's where we'll send
presented
you.
by Southern Grove.
Sponsored by raisins and cookies.
Nature's
We all
Grove.
think they're chocolate chips.
Hashtag Nature's
Hashtag Nature's Grove. All right. Well, this is the segment called the doggy bag, which I'm still in works to change. At a restaurant, people make fun of me, and if you're listening and you know where I'm going with this, I'm sure you're laughing at me. So it's kind of like when you ask for something, there's like a hand gesture that you do. You know what I mean? Like I'm at a restaurant, anytime I'm talking to a waitress from across the room, and I said, "Can I have a little box?" And I always do this with my hands, like they're complete fools and they don't know what box is. Can I have a little box? And so I'm gonna rename this segment "The Little Box." But you have
Why
to
don't
do
you
this
just
with
do
your
like I always ask, can I have a bag? Can I have a bag?
hands. You do
wow.
this.
Okay, both of those are wonderful.
Okay.
I'm confusing when I do that because I don't. No matter what I'm saying, I go like this. Can I? Like I just kind of point to the table in general.
Can you just wrap all
Listen,
this up?
this means the check. This means
Rant aside. Oh, not for you.
this means anything.
Yeah.
It's like just right here. Just come on.
It's kind of like the difference.
I'm waving like I'm
Not like actually saying words. You're
Sometimes
just like
point.
"Arr."
Just point. Zero in. What's up?
Whatever over here.
You just illustrated perfectly the difference between the Bible in Hebrew and the Bible in English, because you can say one thing and mean tons of different things, and we say one thing and it means just this one little thing.
That's awesome.
There's a lesson in there. Yeah. Little box. Can I have a little box?
Little box. Little
So
bag.
this is a little box. This is just.
start doing that. Hey, can we?
Well, I'm gonna start doing this.
Yeah, I don't know what this
I feel
is.
you got to be careful, like who you're talking to. They're going to be offended.
Yeah.
but-
Well, and it's a universal sign. I will say that it transcends all restaurants. But if for some reason, if you're listening and not watching, there's a face that goes along with it, and I'm just going to let you decide what that is in yourself. It's just a little box. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's a character flaw, but here we are. So anyway, the little box, aka the doggy bag section, something that from the book of Malachi, or even the message yesterday, or just anything that was a takeaway, something that inspired you, something that really stuck with you. I want to go first because I'm already talking. So one of the things that I love about these sermons is that they start with the audience, the assignment, the address, and the author. Kind of gives a little bit of where are we at, what are we doing, who are we hearing from, who are we talking to, all that kind of stuff. And I think that my takeaway was kind of immediate from the assignment was it was confronting people's lifestyles. I don't know if this makes a lot of sense to everybody else, but for me, Malachi is the book that it's like when you're talking to somebody about like why you tithe and all of that. Like this is kind of the book that I always reach to. And so I appreciate that it transcends just that. Like it's more obviously than just tithing and everything. But I think that we live in a world where it's like, don't confront, like don't at me, bro. Like that's the culture that we live in. And it's a reminder, I think, too, of just like, hey, our job, not to be buttholes and like not to confront people where like there's not relationship and there's not like a mutual asking of that. But our job is to like help confront each other and like hold ourselves and each other to a standard of holiness. Again, in a way that's kind and life-giving and all of that. But that was my big takeaway, I think, from this was just like there are a lot of things in this book that that are applicable today and good reminders for me of like it is my job as a fellow Christian to help people see these kind of things in their own life. But that was my little box.
Awesome.
Thanks for making me follow that, Caroline. That was good.
You're welcome.
Mine was it came out of your takeaways, PK. You were they were good. I mean, they were all good because put God first is a great reminder because it's not just put God first in one thing or two things, but everything. The second one was kind of the one that spoke to me most because where I was most convicted through kind of reading through Malachi is in chapter 2 where even the title of my book was like additional warning to the priest, and me as a pastor and someone who leads small groups and talks to people, like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, what am I doing in my life? Like, am I giving God my best? Am I leading people to do the same, or am I kind of like leading them astray? It's a big weight for me. And so when you said talent sets the floor, character sets the ceiling, it just kind of made me take another glance at chapter 2.
Yeah, 100%. I would say of the takeaways, that was probably my the one that I felt the most, and I kind of tend to see things through the lens of leadership stuff anyway. Mm-hmm. So I definitely felt that out of it. I'll say that one would probably be my number one takeaway, what Pastor Jason just said. But I'll go back to verse 2 of the whole book. It's the way when the Lord speaks, it's the first thing that he says, I've loved you. Mm-hmm. And there's a part of me that feels like when I look back through the entire Old Testament and in my relationship with the Lord and the way we all know him is that's his message to us. Is he loves us. Like all of this other stuff is just trying to draw people back to like loving him back, Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's I read those words almost, and I have to be careful sometimes reading the prophets that I'll read things like I've loved you with almost this tone, like I've loved you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What have you done? Like I've loved, but I have to remind myself like the God that I know and that I commune with and have a relationship with. His tone is just, look, before I go on 400 years of quiet, I just want you to know I love you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've given everything that I can to you. What he desperately wanted back was to walk in the cool of the day in the garden with us again. Yeah, and he wanted it back so much that 400 years later he sends his son to die one of the worst murders of all time to try to bring that back. Mm-hmm. The reason that we're here, a part of God's grand plan and partnering with him to build a local church, and the reason people are listening to this today is because deep down what we know is he is continuing to say that to us, and we're doing our best to live in that grace and that mercy and that love. So to me, that's it.
That's great.
That first line is really it.
That's good.
That was great. Man, those great discussion. Good stuff.
Good stuff.
I did have one request before we end, I put this out last week too because we had we had Cringe the Bible
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
back a few seasons ago, and it's not a regular one now, but I petitioned last week and we got to share one. I had one from this one too.
Okay.
Nice.
So it's from chapter 2. Again, it's from chapter 2. He says, because of you, I will rebuke your descendants. I will smear on your faces the dung from your festival sacrifices, and you will be carried off with it.
Brought to you by California Raisins from Southern Grove.
Somebody like
That was my cringe.
that is pretty cringe. My cringe wasn't necessarily taken away, but it was just you tied in Cousin Eddie, which I appreciate, and it just always makes you think of the cringy things. Do you have cringy cousin stories, like things that your cousins did that you?
yeah.
Knowing from where you guys are from, I like my cousin. I'm gonna throw that out there.
Great judgment.
It's true though, but the only thing that I have cringy that my cousin ever did, he stapled his lip to his chin. Yeah. So
Awesome.
that's the lineage I come
That's
from.
awesome.
Yeah.
great.
I think just to see if it would stick. It does, by the way. So anyway.
I'm trying to think of cringy cousin. I have more like, we say it in our family, we have in-laws and we have outlaws.
Yeah.
And they kind of fall into some of that category, So I don't know if it's cringy. Most of the time it's been pretty cool. Now, granted, I'm the guy that says if my cousin stapled his lip to his face, that would be pretty cool. That would fall into that category, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the cringe stories happen around family reunions, so I would rather leave those there.
You like to protect the innocent there.
Yeah. That's true.
That's fair.
That's
I
true.
won't name.
The extended family reunions when you go see, like, the other side of the family trees, cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the weird ones.
Yeah, that's fair. I've never been to a family reunion. We just don't do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
We're from Raleigh, so
there's nothing better than a good family
We
reunion.
don't have those there.
nah.
We'd go to family reunions. Everybody brings food.
Yep.
We'd roll up with like KFC. We're not cooking.
That honestly, going to a family reunion, most of the time those are the ones I looked for because I'm like, I don't.
You
know
can't
what
eat
this
at everybody's house.
Yeah, I don't know
That's
who
so
made
much.
this. I don't know what's in there.
You got to keep in mind, this was like, mid 80s.
For sure, at
then,
least a
nobody
toenail
cared.
in there.
And
There's a toenail in that
everything
casserole.
was healthy.
Yeah,
Linda,
back then
Linda
everything
brought a
was healthy.
toenail.
Back then, it was corn. So what if it was corn casserole? It was corn. It was healthy. That's how we rolled in the 80s.
Ugh. Somebody's fingernails in there for sure. Sick.
All right, so are we going to go out singing Toby Keith? What's up?
Is that it?
I think so. I think that's a good sign off. And
All right,
you know,
bring
no
it back,
better,
Pastor Jason.
no better way. Are you doing courtesy of the red, white, and blue? Because I feel like that's.
Oh yeah. So are we just any Toby Keith song at this point? Okay.
Yeah, the train. Yeah, the wheels are off.
They'll they'll edit
Love
this later,
bar.
right?
Why are you clicking on "Love This Bar," Pastor?
Is that when? I would just like to have this as my walkout song.
I think it
100%.
could be.
I've always wanted when I walk into a room, somebody releases Dove. I just think that'd be a great little. Hey, what's up? I'm here.
Yep.
We talk about your work, how your boss is a jerk. We talk about your church and your head when it hurts. We talk about the troubles you've been having with your brother, about your daddy and your mother and